Violet Bridgerton, wife of the late Edmund Bridgerton, daughter of Lord Ledger and Vivian Ledger, mother to a boisterous crowd of 8 children, inclusive of the current Viscount Bridgerton, the Duchess of Hastings, the Countess Kilmartin, friend and confidant to the Lady Danbury, and pick me? I know you looked at this title and have just about had it with me. Because what has always been a bone of contention in the streets is not if Violet Bridgerton is a pick me. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure no one else has ever made that claim, but rather whether or not she is a good mother. Of course, I am of the opinion that there aren't really any good mothers in Bridgerton, not by modern standards anyway, but instead it's a show about mothers who are all in their own little ways trying their best to work with the hands they've been dealt with, whilst trying to ensure the happiness of their children in the way they each know how. And that's a thought process I stand by 100%. Something else that I've been thinking about and leaning a lot towards lately is the thought that Violet Bridgerton, the Dowager Viscountess as she is, might just be a pick me. Now, before you come yelling at me in the comments, please give me about 15 minutes of your time to explain my point. Because you see, when I referred to Violet Bridgerton as a pick me, I'm not using the term in the same way it's being used today, where it's been beaten to death to an almost unrecognizable status, turned into a buzzword that every Tom, Dick, Harry, and Jane like to throw around. What do I mean? Merriam-Webster defines a pick me as a slang term for a person, usually a young woman, seen as behaving in a contemptible way for attention and approval, usually from male peers. It is most often used in the expression pick me girl, which disparages a young woman who is seen as faking interest in stereotypically male activities or conforming to traditional values at the expense of other women. Now, if we are to take the term and adhere to it in the strict dictionary definition that I just repeated, then Violet Bridgerton doesn't actually fit the bill. We've never seen her disparage others. It is clear that she's one of the kindest people in the world of Bridgerton, and she is clearly someone who supports all her children, particularly her daughters, whether they are the dutiful eldest like Daphne or a bit more radical leaning like Eloise. She doesn't attempt to put down other women to prop herself up in the show, and although we've never really gotten a chance to see her when she was just introduced to the ton as a young girl and was being courted, we can assume that she wasn't the type to play games or put down the other young ladies in order to secure her match. Violet Bridgerton is not that type of woman. But if that's the case, Noria, why on earth would you make such a claim that she's a pick-me when, based off of what you said, she isn't a pick-me? That's probably the question you are asking right now, isn't it? Whether it's in your thoughts or you just voiced it out loud as I was speaking. Well, it's because words and their meanings tend to morph and shift through the years and through their usage. Language is in itself a living, breathing thing, and a word or phrase that might have meant something half a century ago might have a completely different meaning in present day. For me, it's the same with the term pick me. Because for you to understand why I can make the claim that Violet Bridgerton is a pick me, there's a need to go back to the roots, the origin of the term itself. Another Shondaland show whose first season aired 20 years ago, and which I rewatch the first 10 seasons every year or 2 years, because it's also my happy place, and Christina Yang will always be my inspiration and the love of my life. Yes, I am referring to Grey's Anatomy. Specifically, the conversation between Meredith and Derek, where she says the iconic line, pick me, choose me, love me. Which I know Ellen Pompeo has said in interviews how much she tried kicking back against that scene being filmed because she felt the words were too desperate. And yet, I've always been happy about the show keeping them because it's iconic to Meredith Grey's state of mind and also speaks to an understanding of what the core of her character and emotional state and needs are. And I really appreciate them keeping that. Now, have there been conversations prior to the airing of that episode about young women who are so desperate to be liked and loved that they are willing to change their entire personality to suit the needs of the men that they are attracted to so that they can be chosen by them? Yes, there have been. A lot of them. Plus, I do think that a lot of times when people throw around the pick me accusation, the word they're actually looking for is not like other girls. Because to use the pick me line is to acknowledge the origin of it in our modern day lingo. And the origin of it is, like I said, Grey's Anatomy Season 2, Episode 5, which at its core is not about a young woman changing who she is, shifting like some sort of chameleon and losing her sense of self in order to nab a man. It's about a young girl dealing with the trauma born of a childhood of parental separation and divorce, and overly demanding mother, a weak-willed father, and a desire to be loved and chosen for herself. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? When we get our first glimpse into a much younger Violet Bridgerton, it is a glimpse of a precocious young lady. Like her daughter Eloise, young Violet is curious about their world and its workings and tends to ask a lot of questions, something that delights her father and upsets her mother, which is what gives us an immediate understanding of her parents' marriage dynamic. Lord Ledger is the type of husband and father who loves his daughter, yes, and she knows she's quite loved by him, but he doesn't like to rock the boat. Matter of fact, he avoids doing so as much as he can, because his wife Vivian has a sharp tongue and is quite clearly someone who nags a lot. And as much as Lord Ledger might have had that brief moment of passion with Agatha Danbury, he's still the dutiful husband that goes back home to his perfunctory marriage and nagging wife. That is the type of environment in which Violet Bridgerton was raised. And I'm sure we know this, but it does bear repeating. Our childhood experiences shape who we become as adults. Some people are driven to replicate it, especially if it's a traumatic response, as that is to them the best way to have some semblance of control. I.e., you already know how bad things can be, and there is a sense of comfort in knowing what to expect. And some people rebel against that and push instead to have their story be different. And we see this clearly in the case of Violet Bridgerton, with the way in which she loved Edmund and vice versa. It is quite clear that theirs is not a marriage in any way, shape, or form like her parents' marriage. Their home is filled with love, laughter, and a ton of children. And when Edmund passes, hers is the last face he sees, and she's utterly shattered by that loss. If we define the pick-me based off of the Meredith Grey archetype, then we see traces of her in Violet as well. Now, for those who for some reason have never watched Grey's Anatomy, which if that is the case, you totally should. The first 10 seasons of the show is absolute perfection, and 10 is a lovely number. You get to end the season with thoughts of Christina and Meredith's dance party, and you see my baby girl Christina off. It is a solid place to stop. From season 1, it's just pain and more pain, and then things become quite the snooze fest, in my opinion, of course. But if you haven't watched Grey's Anatomy, in the episode aptly titled Bring the Pain, Derek is at an impasse, torn between sticking with his marriage of 11 years and trying to make things work with Addison, or choosing to be with Meredith, who he's falling in love with, and vice versa. Now, do I intend to make a Derek Shepherd was the villain of Grey's Anatomy all along? Yes. Yes, I do. McDreamy my fucking ass. More like McNasty. Mick, you were her fucking teacher. Mick, all these women deserve better than your fucking ass. Breathe, Noria, breathe. Anyway, Derek is a torn. But the focus of the episode and that scene is Meredith, who finally, in a moment that some would call desperate, whilst I say was her being both desperate, bad, and vulnerable, good, begs Derek to pick her, choose her, love her. In the show, Meredith doesn't turn her entire life into becoming the person Derek wants. That wasn't what made her a pick-me. What made her a pick-me is the parting words of advice that Christina leaves her with when she's leaving Grace Sloan Memorial Hospital. Derek is not the son. You are. A pick me is a young woman who decides that the man in her life, the man she loves, is one whom she should orbit. Is her reason for being and living, and she finds herself instinctively and intuitively taking decisions that is for the man's benefit. When Edmund Bridgerton dies, Violet shatters. She becomes someone who is so devastated that after the birth of Hyacinth, she checks out from her family, unwilling to even sit with them and grab a meal with them. All her attention was on the husband she'd lost, and when Anthony begged her to come back to eat with her kids, to talk to them, she instead talks about her wish that she could live and be with Edmund forever. He was her son. And she spent the entirety of their marriage orbiting him. And when she lost him, she lost her anchor, her sense of self, her reason for being, and her reason for living. And that feeling of loss is because her love for him made her vulnerable. And that vulnerability is what saw her breaking when he died. And I know a lot of people erroneously believe that a pick-me is someone who would put down other women so that she can be chosen. I personally think that the origin of that thought process is because a lot of people took the term literally. And to them, a pick-me has to be someone who would castigate others so that they would be picked. And I know that is a hang-up for those who are watching this video and considering my assertion, my claim that Violet Bridgerton is a pick-me. Because Violet isn't someone that felt a need to put down other women. And you would be right. Violet isn't that type of person. She's had no reason to. Know who else isn't that type of person? The one for whom the pick-me term in modern usage was born. Meredith Grey. Meredith, as a pick-me, isn't someone who felt the need to put down other women. She never did. Matter of fact, the gag about Grey's Anatomy was that Meredith and Addison became very good friends in the latter seasons. Hell, even in season 2, they might have had moments where Addison treated Meredith like the other woman and Meredith is wilted because Derek chose Addison instead of her, but they still had moments where they bonded. Addison still found drug-addled Meredith cute and funny and spoke up for her when a patient was being mean to Meredith because the patient heard the chatter about the drama with Derek and thought Meredith was the other woman out to snatch Addison's husband. So whether it was Addison, the nurse that Derek had a thing with, or the other women in our cohort, Christina, Easy, right? She never felt the need to put them down. She saw them as competition for surgeries, yes, but never for a man. That wasn't how her character was wired. The pick-me that she was is someone who craved love, was desperate for it, and because of that desperation, found herself orbiting the man she fell in love with. And we can definitely see traces of that with Violet Bridgerton as well. Love is something that she can never take for granted. It was scarce in her home and non-existent between her father and her mother. And you can say, well, what about the other women in the ton? After all, loveless marriages are pretty common in that era. And to that, I would say, 1, we never did get to see a younger Portia or Aminta. And 2, due to the conflict between her brother Marcus and herself, we got an inkling into what life was like for a younger Agatha Danbury. And as we heard, she attempted to run away from her loveless match and might have succeeded if her brother hadn't tattled on her. Maybe if Agatha's affair with Lord Ledger had gone long enough, we might have seen her also have a pick-me moment, asking him to choose between her and Vivian. Something tells me, though, that he would have pulled a Derek in that moment. He would have looked at his wife and daughter and broken Agatha's heart as well. Which, when we really look at it, he already kind of did. Why else would she hold memorabilia of him decades after he's passed? But yes, I do think that Violet Bridgerton is a pick-me. Not according to the general definition and how it's being used today, but how it was used and meant back when it first entered the social lexicon due to the iconic episode of Grey's. And it makes sense to me that she would be because Shonda Rhimes can't help it and loves writing her pick-me woman into her shows. And no, contrary to what others might say, I don't think Kate is a pick-me or Eloise. I can see pen fitting the bill, however, but that's because of everything I've said previously about Violet. She, like her mother in law, is someone who craves love and finds herself revolving around the man she loves. But that's just my thought. What about yours? Do you agree with me or disagree with me completely? Or are there elements to what I've said that you resonate with? Please let me know in the comments. Like this video if you've gotten this far and haven't done so yet. Share this if you want to. Support me on Patreon if you can. And until Monday's video, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.